classrooms with the opportunities here.
Okay.
With the Historic Society, with the state.
Well, Bill Bigelow was the person to do that. Yeah. But he edits the magazine and I think in schools. He's done fine. Yeah.
He becomes part of the community.
Yeah, that's right.
I decided you can use this piece of information.
Well, I made sure I kept ownership because I think
That's very important.
and they would offer.
Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again, folks. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host of Oregon Voters Digest. Boy, I tell you, this has been quite a day. I mean, all kinds of things are happening with this here at this point in time. Pandemic all over the place. Just heard about New York, talking about polio's coming back to the table. And wow, they're talking about the pandemic aspect of it. And then we got the forest fires. We got all kinds of things. And gee, I got 3 masks in my pockets. I just keep them all over the place right now. But you know, folks, but don't worry, we'll get through this aspect of it. But hey, we're gonna have quite a show today, and what the show's gonna be about. If you missed this, have you seen these? This Oregon and the Klan. I don't know if you still haven't read it. Hey, you haven't seen it, right? But this is a very interesting history of Oregon. Even I did not understand it, did not know that Oregon had a very much involved interest in the Klan aspect of it. But the bottom line is that there's a lot to be heard about this. You know, I'm from the South, born in Louisiana, raised in Texas aspect of it, and I would see it around. And my dad was a strong man, so we never had to worry about that part, you know. And so it was just another interesting piece. But when I came here, and all of a sudden, I'd been very, very much involved in politics here in the state of Oregon. And as you know, I went on and picked up the Oregon Voters Digest aspect of it, another interesting publication aspect of it. And but that's that piece of it. But the fact of the matter is, race has always been thrown on the table ever since I've been here on doing the Oregon Voters Digest as a talk show aspect of it. But periodically I would do something on this and that, whether it be the police or whether it be this or whether it be this and this, that, the other. But the fact of the matter is you get so involved in it. I said, is there an end to this thing? And I'm at that point in my life, and I've probably got another maybe good 20 years here, maybe 15, 20. And I'm just saying, look, I want something done about this piece. I want to be more progressive, if you will. You know, besides being an Oregonian, I'm a U.S. citizen, you know what I mean? And I spent my time in the Marine Corps, and I tell you, when I've come out, I am definitely born USA aspect of it. So it's a very important piece. I mean, you can't live if you're stressing yourself all throughout the radio, right? I mean, you know, at some point in time, you want to just take it easy somewhere, whatever. So now I'm just a communicator. I'm a journalist in my own right. So the bottom line is that, hey, I'm an avid reader. And when this article came out about the whole issue of the Klan, wow. And after I picked it up and I spent my time reading them carefully in aspect of it, this is not anything violent. This is history. And you ask yourself the question, why wasn't this history in our classrooms? Why wasn't this history not in our preschool and okay, 1 through 12, but what about our higher education aspect of it? You would think that series should have been part and parcel of the teacher certification aspect of it. And there's a lot of things that I got out of these particular issues. But at the same point, I couldn't take it along, so I went out and I Googled everything that I could about the Klan. And there was so much information, folks. There's nowhere in the world. It would take me 30 years just to pick up and read up all these articles and get a feel for what's going on. But guess what? We've got someone in Oregon, a communicator, a journalist for that matter. Someone that I sort of met maybe on the way when I was over there at Cable and whatever around. But the fact of that is, this gentleman is from Oregon. And what I'd like to do is that I'd like to go on new tack. I mean, we've seen all kinds of things about race and this, that, and the other, and whatever. But this piece is here. And the gentleman here with me today, he's the writer. He's the guy that originated this particular piece. And what I'm asking him to do today is to kind of bring everything up to date and sort of like, where do we go from here as far as the Klan? But using the Klan from the standpoint, it's part of our history. And where do we go and how can we then benefit and put these together? Because we are definitely a multicultural. And we're so sophisticated nowadays, everybody just wants just that one piece. They just want their own culture, and everybody's fighting for their own culture. But guess what? There's no such thing as one person gets it all. No. It's all of us. We're all here. We're the United States of America. And guess what? Portland, Oregon is going to put that thing together. And here's my guest. How about Steve Law? Steve Law is my guest today, and he's the originator of these articles. And please, you may want to consider making sure you contact your parents and your friends and anybody you know, and let them tune in on this deal. You know it's on Comcast, and if it's not on Comcast, you can Google it on YouTube. You can Google it on YouTube. But I plan to hopefully maybe do one or two interviews with Steve. But if he doesn't get all the information out there, I think we're going to bring him back. But that's what we're going to do. Steve, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, Bruce?
Nice seeing you.
Nice seeing you.
Well, it's been a while.
Yeah, it has.
Well, look, like I said, the format is very simple. Why don't we just start off with what about some of your personal background and when did you come to Oregon? We got to do that stuff.
Sure. I came here 2 years out of college. I grew up in L.A. and
Where did you go to school?
Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, where Coretta Scott King went. He's one of our famous alums, among others. I was actually credentialed as a history teacher and political science major. I went to LA and taught for a couple of years. I taught some history, and then moved to Portland in 1979. And with a couple of years off in Alaska and on the road, I've been here ever since. And I worked, started off as a teacher, got into journalism, working through cable radio as a volunteer coordinator in the early 80s. And then went to work at a NPR radio station in Alaska to become a news reporter, learning on the job. And then I came back to Portland, worked in some suburban papers in Washington County and Lake Oswego. And then went, of all places, to the Business Journal here in Portland. And then from there went to the Statesman Journal, covered state politics and state government for 10 years in Salem. And I was commuting. I never really moved from Portland, but then I came back to Portland to work for the Portland Tribune my last 11 years. And I retired about 3 years ago.
Wow.
So.
Wow. And we've known one another for a number of years.
Yes. I always cross you different places. Come across you.
Every 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's just get right up in the issue with the KKK aspect of it. It's a very interesting topic. What got you interested?
Well, I've always been interested in history, and of course I've taught history, and when I was a reporter, I tended to like write stories sometimes about history that looked at that, because I think it's really important to learn from your history. And I was really inspired by a podcast on the media where you probably know Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative. He's been celebrated in movies. I might get the name of the movie. He was a young black Yale Law School graduate who comes to the South to get people off death row, and they made a movie out of it, and I think HBO special. Anyway, in this podcast, he talked about how in Germany now, you can go down the streets of Germany, and they have these stepping stones that force you to step up on the sidewalk, and you read them, and they say, in this house in 1939, the Schwartz family was taken to Auschwitz and executed, killed, and they spread all through Berlin and then Germany and then several other countries. And then Brian Stevenson, who was studying, who went and studied how their people are educating the public in Rwanda after the genocide. He's been to South Africa and studied it, and the German example, and he said, the Germans have done a much better job of fessing up to their history, and in his view, that's how you move on. If you want to really go to the next step, you gotta talk about that history. And he said, but you come to this country, and you're familiar with is it Edmund Pettus Bridge?
Yes.
We name bridges after Confederate, people. We name army bases after Confederate people who actually were treasonous and fought against our country. So we don't do that very well in this country. And he drew that, and it was just like, it was very inspiring. And I thought, well, how do we do that in this country? So I started trying to do that, and I wrote a couple pieces as op-eds, because I was already retired for the Portland Tribune. I did one, because I live in the South Tabor neighborhood, and I started researching. There was an anti-Chinese riot right in Mount Tabor that nobody ever, talks about. I can look at Mount Tabor out my front window, up the hill and see it, and it's just like this history should be known to people. And then I knew that there was a cross burning. The KKK did a cross burning on Mount Tabor. You could see it all throughout the city, and this was a century ago. And so when it came time, I wrote a piece about the cross burning on Mount Tabor, and then I decided to do a whole look back, because 2021 was a centennial of when the Ku Klux Klan, the revived Ku Klux Klan, expanded into Oregon. And so I started it last year and finished it this year, because it's a centennial of when, basically, it's, some people know about it, some people know a little, some people know nothing, but that the KKK dominated Oregon politically, and Portland politically, a century ago. 1922, they elected a governor who had a real uphill battle to win, and it was because of them that he won. And they passed a ballot measure banning all private schools in Oregon. They were really targeting not the elite private schools; they were targeting Catholics, because they had most of the schools, and they did other things too. But those are probably the two biggest areas where the KKK made their mark in Oregon. And so it was a centennial this year. And so I wrote about it, and the Tribune ran. It's an 8-part series that appears in 6 editions of the paper, one week after the
Tell you
other.
what, on that particular note, again, to help that viewing audience, because they can do it. I want to take each issue.
Okay.
And then you can just go through that whole piece.
Oh, okay.
And that'll help them out.
All right.
Okay. And so, in fact, the first issue was Oregon and the Klan. Right? Oregon and the Klan, Wednesday, July the 27th.
Okay.
22. Okay. All right. Talk about that.
Well, the Klan arrived. I can talk a little bit briefly, because some people don't know the difference between the 1920s version of the Klan and the original Klan. So the original Klan was formed in, I think, 1865. It's kind of a well-known story. Basically terrorized black people, enslaved people, to put them back in their place, because after the Civil War, they were promised the vote, 40 acres and a mule, remember that?
That's right.
And they were promised equality. Of course, it never came, but the government did take some significant steps. And if you ever read about so-and-so was the second black ever elected to the Senate in the state, well, the first black was in Reconstruction, because blacks had the vote, and they actually had political power, because the Union Army occupied the South, and it made sure they could vote and have rights. But then the Klan comes in, to neutralize and defeat the power of the black electorate, and to put them back in their place. And they're very successful at it. And the key thing was it's a long story, but Reconstruction really was ended through this deal that the Democrats and Republicans made over a disputed election, and the Republicans got the presidency, and the Democrats, which were represented the South primarily and some of the cities in the North, they got an end to the Union Army being in the South. So Jim Crow laws sprang up all throughout the South. We know, our readers or viewers know about Jim Crow laws, really denying blacks the vote, among other things. Forget owning land, forget having any rights, lynchings and all these other things totally terrorized much of the black community and very effectively quashed any move towards equality. So that was the KKK, which was sending men in sheets, riding around with flames and terrorizing people, and lynching people. And but they kind of faded after Jim Crow laws did the work of the Klan. The Klan accomplished what they wanted. So the Klan kind of faded in this post-Civil War period. 1915. A guy named D.W. Griffith comes out with this movie, Birth of a Nation, and he retells the story of that Klan in a very inaccurate way and romanticized the Klan. They're saving white women from these black enslaved people who are raping them, and they're such good people. They represent the flag and Jesus and everything good, and that was a hugely popular film. Woodrow Wilson avowed racist, showed the film in the White House. It was very popular. It was shown at theaters in Portland, and it really really brought back the Klan in people's consciousness. And that later that year, a fellow by the name of William Simmons recreates really what we call Klan version 2. So there's no continuous organization. It kind of faded, and then he brought back a new version. And the symbol then was this burning cross. They had a burning cross on Stone Mountain in Georgia. That was a very popular image that since then by the extreme right. And that's probably where the idea of burning crosses got popular. I don't think they burned crosses in the first Klan. Historians aren't that sure, but they don't think it was a common thing. But it comes later. So we have a new Klan, and the new Klan is very different. It was a private corporation. It was a for-profit endeavor by this guy, William Simmons, and he didn't really succeed very well for the first few years. In fact, I read a reference that he had to hire blacks to wear white sheets to march in a parade, which would be comical if it wasn't so sad and pathetic. But that's a sign of how bad of an organizer he was, that he had to do that. And then he hires these people, Elizabeth Tyler and Edward Clark, 5 years later, to come in and say they had this vision. They were early PR professionals, and they had this vision about how we're going to do the Klan in a different way, and it was through money. And everybody was basically a paid organizer by commission. So you send out these people like an Amway dealer or something like that, and you make money from signing up people. So it gave this huge incentive to sign up members. So in 1921, sorry for the long intro, but 1921, I think it's around 1920 or so when this couple, I think they were a couple, but I'm not sure if they were romantically involved, but they were definitely partners, really expanded the Klan, which was always a hate group, always hated people. They were racist, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic. They were white Protestant males, basically. And they kept that link to the old Klan, but they said they were the new, kinder, gentler Klan. And we're going to follow the law. Not really, but they didn't do, as far as we know, widespread lynchings. There were some. They didn't go around and terrorize blacks. 1915, Black America was under the thumb of these Jim Crow laws, and we had them in Oregon too. We didn't call them that, but they were Jim Crow laws in Oregon too. There's segregation and all sorts of black voter suppression here and stuff like that. But so they didn't really. Racists didn't need to put blacks in their place. They were already down. So, but this was a period when, after World War I, that was a big mess, World War I, and there was a lot of anti-foreign involvement, anti-immigrant sentiment, and so the country was kind of ripe for this really bigoted message against immigrants. And that was a period where we had 30, 40 years of Jewish immigrants, Catholic immigrants, Greek Orthodox immigrants, others, mostly what we would today call white. But they didn't consider them whites.
Blacks were not allowed. Right?
No, but not just blacks. I mean, in those days, Jews, Italians, Greeks were not considered white.
Okay. Oh, okay.
They're different. And one of the and there's all sorts of other things happening. Prohibition was big in those days, and there was the Red Scare, if you remember that, the anarchist upsurge, and there was a lot of fears about anarchist violence, and anarchists, of course, were working with people of that persuasion, were organizing labor unions and stuff like that. So there was a big the country was kind of ripe for this anti-immigrant backlash because there'd been a lot of change going on. So these guys came to Oregon. They're paid commission to sign up members, and it caught on like wildfire. And that's really not that much of an exaggeration. So they get to Portland in the spring of 1921. They first came to Medford probably in January. Maybe a few months later, they come to Portland. They come to Portland, and they start signing up members. And they got lists of people who were in these lodges, and they hit up people. So you're in this lodge, you're in the Masons, which is was considered anti-Catholic. Hey, sign up to be in the KKK. We're the new KKK. And people signed up in droves. So by the end of 1921, the Klan has their coming out meeting in a place, it was called Portland Municipal Auditorium. We know it today as the Keller Auditorium, the one in front of all those wonderful little fountains where we have arts activities. They packed 6,000 people in there, and they paid, I think it was 50 cents a head, to go watch this very reactionary white Baptist or white Protestant minister. I'm not sure if he was Baptist. Give a very anti-Semitic, anti-black, anti-Asian, anti-Catholic sermon, and they think that a film, and it just showed. And the mayor of Portland was in the audience, and the mayor was there, and and so this was a sign the Klan had really become a power. And there were some people, the NAACP told the mayor, you shouldn't be having the Klan use public buildings. It was a publicly owned building, performance building or meeting hall, auditorium. And the governor said in the newspaper, the mayor said in the paper, well, if we denied him, there'd be riots in the streets. That may have been true, but it was he was actually sympathetic to the Klan. He was, anyway. So that was going on in 1921, and according to one source, the following day, the mayor deputized vigilantes to join to support the Portland Police Department, and many of them were Klansmen that he got from the Klan. So they became part and parcel of the Portland Police Bureau, and some estimates say close to half or more of the Portland Police signed up as Klansmen. And so that was by the end of their first year here. That's part one.
Part one. I'm doing excited. I remember, as I said before.
Okay, sorry.
But I'm saying to the viewer, now you can kind of understand.
Yeah.
Read the articles.
Okay.
And compare this to the same.
And by the end of the year, there were chapters of the Klan all throughout Oregon, several chapters in Salem, Eugene, Ashland, Medford, Hood River. And we have a series of people who came in to lead the Klan. The two important ones are Luther Powell, who was their first or the second big Klan organizer here, and a guy who replaced him Fred Gifford, and they became powerhouses in the Klan here. And because Portland became such a hotbed of the Klan nationally, I think the biggest chapter west of the Mississippi, that they were involved. They were influential in the national Klan. Certainly regional. Yeah, yeah. I have some stats here that Portland at one point had the sixth. This is an estimate. Had the sixth largest number of Klan members of any city in the country. 22,000. This is over a period of several years, so some might leave and some might join. Chicago was the tops at 50,000. If you look at the list, Portland had more than Atlanta, where the Klan was, the second Klan was founded, more than LA, more than New York. It was really big here, really big here. And yeah, in Oregon, when they estimate, these are rough numbers, hard to get, 50,000. We were one of the largest. The largest by far was Indiana, of all places. Some people who know the Klan history, and then Ohio. But per capita, I think Oregon had the second highest number of Klansmen, maybe after Indiana. So it got really big here, and some people say, why? Well, some of it is those conditions I was talking about. Those people were ripe to join movements, and this was a Protestant state. The Catholics numbered less than 7%, Jews were less than 1%, blacks were less than 1%. There were only about 1,700 some blacks in Portland in 1920, according to the census.
That's when the majority of them were at the state. Right?
And that was most of them. Yeah, statewide was less than 2,500.
Yes.
So yeah, were blacks terrified of this second coming of the Klan? You bet. Were Jews anxious? You bet. Because the speeches were, terrible. The kind of things they said. One speech said, "The only good Catholic is a dead Catholic." So if you weren't afraid of that, you were naive. There was people said, was there much violence? There was some violence. Some of it didn't get covered, but there was a string of 3 necktie parties in the Medford area where people were victimized by masked people, which are probably Klansmen. You put on a white sheet, we don't know who they were, but they're probably Klansmen, and they strung them up on a rope, and they were, I'm not sure what the definition of lynching is. It seems like a lynching to me, but they let them down before they choked to death. And they said, "Get out of town." And the interesting thing, one of the people was a Catholic, one was black, one was Mexican American. So one of them actually owed some money to Klans members, so there could be personal agendas as well. But they said they had these series of these. So Medford, they called them the Medford outrages. That was probably the biggest example of outright violence in the second coming of the Klan. But what they did to people was, instilled a lot of fear in people. So in May of 1922, we have the Klan has 2 lectures, 2 days, I think in the same building, if I'm not mistaken, and it was sold out. The first one was sold out, and there were, reportedly, this is according to the media at the time, like newspaper coverage at the time, 1,500 people couldn't get in, and there was a riot in the streets because they couldn't get in. And the Multnomah County Sheriff had to call quite a few officers to come and instill order in the streets. And the next night, they had another 1,000 people that couldn't get in. So it just goes to show how big the Klan had got. The governor at the time, a guy by the name of Ben Alcott. Now, Oregon was Republican, solid Republican state. And Republicans then, as you well know, were more the Lincoln Republicans, or at least how that had evolved in the, 50, 60 years after Lincoln. The Republican Party was getting more big business oriented and whatnot, and the Democratic Party of the South was getting a lot of the immigrants. So a lot of the Irish, for instance, and Italian immigrants, the Catholic interests, were joining the Democratic Party, and so were the people in the South. The South was still a solid Democratic Party. So both parties were kind of mishmash politically, but Oregon was solid Republican state, and Governor Ben Alcott, who was an incumbent, got a little worried about the Klan, and he did a proclamation. This is the 22 governor's race in the primary. He went public with this proclamation condemning the Klan, and that's probably the biggest instance of a political opposition and
He was a Republican.
he was a Republican, and he condemned the Klan for bigotry, and he said it's a bad, a terrible influence on the state. But it was a very heated primary. The Klan supported his primary opponent, a guy by the name of Charles Hall, state senator. And Hall, who, it's not often you defeat an incumbent, right? Then or now. And the incumbent almost lost to this state senator who wasn't that. I don't know how prominent he was, but I don't think he was that prominent because the Klan supported Hall. So he lost by, the Klan supported guy lost by a few hundred votes in the primary. But that same election, that primary, the Klan elects their people to the Multnomah County Commission. Most of the people who won the primary from the Portland area were supported by the Klan. The delegation that was going to go to Salem, most of them were Klan supported. There was I have a little piece in the story how the Klan leader set himself up at a downtown Portland office building, and this is according to articles that I found from the clips in the Multnomah County Library. You can go see the microfiche and these old newspaper articles and magazine articles. And he basically held court, and everybody who wanted to run for office came to get his endorsement, Fred Gifford. If you wanted to win, you needed the Klan endorsement. And he was in league with these anti-Catholic, ethnic-oriented lodges, the Scottish Rite Masons and aligned groups. At some point, those were considered Klan-dominated, but they worked like this, hand in hand. And they endorsed candidates. So that month after the primary in 1922, so a little over 100 years ago right now, the Scottish Rite Masons filed this ballot measure ostensibly against all private schools, and it would close them all basically by forcing all the kids to go to public schools. And the message was, we're America, we want to Americanize all these kids. And it had a populist, you might even say a progressive sound to it. We want to have all these kids get to know each other and go to school together. We don't want these elite private schools, dividing us. But the real agenda was anti-Catholic. And remember, the Klan was a hugely Protestant, white organization, and one of the pieces, I can get to that next, was the history of strife between Catholics and Protestants in the U.S., which we kind of buried in history as well. But that June, the ballot measures put on the ballot, and the Klan was the force, the muscle behind that ballot measure. And so by November, the general election, the Klan flipped after supporting this Republican for the primary. Said, we're going to get this Democrat, Walter Pierce, and we're going to go with him because Ben Walcott, the Republican incumbent, had already condemned the Klan. He made his stance known. You could say he was principled, or you can say he needed to attack them because they were an ascendant power. And so Oregon at the time, I believe the number was there were 3 times as many registered Republicans as Democrats. It was an overwhelmingly Republican state. And in November, the Democrat wins, and he unseats the incumbent, Walcott, and with the Klan support. And he was called an honorary Klansman in the minutes to the LeGrand Klan meetings. The Democrat, yeah. And remember, Democrats were in the South, right? So they were.
Right.
But in Oregon, you didn't. If you wanted to take over Oregon politics, you started with Republicans because they ran the show. But that wasn't working with Alcott. Although a lot of the members of the legislature that the Klan endorsed were Republicans. Am I talking too slow? Okay. Okay. So yeah, I think that's I'll say. So that's the second part of this. How they really got to take over. And there's one little sidebar we have there. Very curious association of the 3 of the top Klan leaders in the Portland area all worked for utilities. And utilities, people who know Oregon history, there's a huge battle, decades-long battle over what they call public power. Who controls, the energy that we sell to people? And in Washington, much of Washington went to public power. In Oregon, powers that be fought it. and they fought it everywhere, but they were less successful. The public power forces were less successful in Oregon. That's one reason Washington has cheaper energy prices, electricity prices to this day than Portland, because they have so many more publicly owned that don't have to, make profits for the utility. But that was a big issue. The big issue was who controlled the streetcar and the streetcar fares, and how much they were charging for telephones and all that. And so 3 of the top Klansmen, according to historians, were kept on their utilities payroll while they basically worked full-time for the Klan. And there's some historians that have concluded, including the fellow who wrote the most prominent history of Portland. There's a 3-part history of Portland. It's this thick. Kimbark McCall, it's in his book, and other sources said basically it was too curious why these utilities would pay these guys when they weren't doing anything. They weren't showing up to work there. They were taking over the state politically, right? And so there's some people who think that the utilities wanted to kind of push the Klan to get people's mind off the public power movement that was pretty big. And so that's we did one of the sidebars in the story. So part 3 is the whole Catholic issue. And talking to some historians, we think, if you go back in history, of course we know about the big battles between the Catholics and the Protestants in Europe, the whole the Protestant Reformation. People go to church and know all this stuff, and then there's a Catholic counter, Counter-Reformation, just big battles between Catholics and Protestants. Well, that didn't end when those people came to take over the U.S. Those people settled the U.S. And they carried that fight, that battle between Protestantism and Catholic traditions with them here. And I can't really go into it. I didn't go into it that much in the series, but it came to Oregon too. When the first missionaries came here, there was battles between Catholics and Protestants. It was always big, but the issue was here, we were 90-some% Protestant. So it wasn't a fair deal. Now, New York, I don't know what the stats were, but New York had a very vibrant, as people might recall, Irish and Italian, sectors, huge. They didn't try to ban Catholic schools in New York or Massachusetts. They probably would have had much more fight back here. But in Oregon, they were kind of a beleaguered minority in a way. In the same election that Governor Walter Pierce, the Democrat, wins with Klan backing, the anti-Catholic schools measure passes. And fortunately, I think it's fair to say fortunately, because it was really a bigoted campaign. It wasn't really designed to Americanize. It was designed to take Catholic people's rights away and discourage them from moving to Oregon. But it never went into effect. But there were several other religious schools then, Lutheran and Seventh-day Adventist, others, and then there were more what we might call the elite private schools, the predecessors of some of our current elite private schools. They were there then, and they fought it. There were blacks who fought the measure, Jews who fought the measure, and others, but it still passed. The interesting thing, it passed more in Portland, where more Catholics lived than the rest of the state. So that's kind of interesting. I was told by one historian in Southern Oregon, it didn't pass. We think of Southern Oregon as being more right-wing, and it didn't pass in Southern Oregon. And what he said was, there's a Catholic hospital there that during the flu epidemic of 1919 to 20, they took people in to the Catholic hospital who didn't have, wherewithal to pay for it, and got a lot of goodwill from things like that. So it didn't pass in Southern Oregon. But here, where we had, some pretty important Catholic schools, some of the ones we still know of were around in those days, and of course, big, the nuns and from Merrillhurst, and there's ones from Washington County. They were around then. They were pretty well known, but this measure passed despite their opposition. Those people particularly the Catholic groups from Washington County and elsewhere, immediately sued, and they kept it from going into effect, and eventually it was overturned as unconstitutional. But it was a pretty big deal. I think then maybe I should talk a little bit about what happened when the Klan got control of the legislature. In that 1922 election, most of the delegation from Multnomah County was Klan supported, and other parts of the state. And interestingly enough, there's a fellow named Casper K. Kubley. His initials were KKK. Total coincidentally, he had been a member of the Portland City Council, and he was in the House of Representatives. He was named House Speaker, and he was a Klan member. In fact, they gave him free membership because of his initials. Made a big deal about it, but he was a Klan supporter, a Klansman. So,
And what party was that?
I believe that was Republican.
That was Republican?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the legislature, you've got this Klan-supported governor. They tried to do a few things that for the Klan agenda, but you can start to see the Klan's influence wane a little bit. But the biggest thing I think they passed was a alien land bill, which barred Japanese and Chinese immigrants from owning land. At the time, white landowners were very scared of the competition, particularly from Japanese, but also Chinese. And you know, in Hood River, there was a strong contingent of Japanese people working in gardening and different crops, orchards and things. And Multnomah County, especially in eastern Multnomah County, there was also a lot. So a lot of it was like, we're trying to get rid of the competition here. But in fact, very few of those Japanese and Chinese families had to sell their land outside. You know, there wasn't any forced. They didn't lose their land because their kids were born here and they gained citizenship, so they passed on the title to their kids. So they got around it. So the biggest Klan achievement in the legislature didn't really achieve that much. The other thing they did is they banned wearing religious garb in the classroom. Well, that was aimed at nuns. There was an estimated less than 24 nuns who taught in public schools, and they wore their habits. Nowhere wearing habits. I imagine Jewish stars can't do that, or there were really very few. I don't know if there's any Muslims wearing any. You know, that wasn't an issue then, but it was basically targeting the Catholics. And so in March of 1923, the New York Times ran a photo of a big banquet that the Klan had to honor the birthday of this guy, Gifford, who was the leader here. And the Portland mayor was at this banquet, and the governor was at this banquet. And so, as late as, 1923, you still did not want to cross the Klan. So they still had to show up, to this political thing. And by the end of the year, in November of 1923, the Klan had a big initiation ceremony at the state fairgrounds in Salem, and they had two airplanes flying over with some burning cross pulling behind, with the Klan bands playing, 4,000 people watching, several hundred people being initiated, 700 people being initiated into the Klan. So by the end of 1923, the Klan was still really potent that year that they took over, they were in the legislature. But the signs of them losing their power and influence were evident. Now we can go to the. Well, if you want to do it that way, okay.
But you got another point. I said.
No, that sounds good. I wanted to tell you the next one is not as much in chronological.
This is your media piece. Right?
Yeah.
It's your media piece. So what was the coverage on that piece? Talk about that.
Oh, yeah. I found that as a reporter, I was particularly interested in how did the media cover the Klan.
Right.
And you can go to the Multnomah County Library and you can read what the Oregonian wrote, what the Oregon Journal wrote, what many other papers wrote. But there's another paper that's not. You have to go through their microfiche because they never actually got it. they never got it. Well, it's digitized in the sense that they have microfiche, but they never digitized the records.
Okay.
So there's a newspaper that most people have never heard of, the Portland Telegram, was the third biggest paper in Portland. And they were a feisty paper, and what I would say is they did their job as a watchdog. What we like to say, we're supposed to watch over, no matter which party, whatever political. We watch over for the public and make sure that we're asking hard questions and holding people to account. And that was the Portland Telegram. And the Oregonian, I have to say, which was the biggest paper then, as now, was AWOL.
AWOL.
AWOL. You're a military guy.
AWOL. I want to know what that. No, there's no such thing as
The Oregonian, we have some details. One person did a master's thesis evaluating how the Portland media covered the Klan.
Okay.
So I read through that, and I read through a lot of the microfiche, the Oregon Journal and the Oregonian, and then the Portland Telegram. If you go into the card catalog system, remember the card catalog system?
Yes, I remember that.
You go into there in these little wooden drawers,
Yeah.
and you look up KKK, and it'll tell you what the Portland Telegram did to cover it in 1921, 1922. And so from there, then you can go into the microfiche, and they have all the microfiche there. But you can't really look at it digitized. You can't just look at something online and say who covered what.
Okay.
So one of the the Portland Telegram covered when the Klan came to Portland. They interviewed people who were organizing. They covered them all the way, and they gave somewhat, you could say fair coverage, but somewhat critical coverage of what the Klan was saying. And the Oregonian waited, I believe it was 6 weeks, to catch up to the fact that the Klan was here organizing. Now, admittedly, maybe they thought there weren't really going to be a force here. But they did not cover it, and when they finally did, it was like page 14, I think, of the Oregonian.
On front page.
The first time I saw them cover the Klan. But really, if you looked nationally, you could see the Klan had been getting big in some other states. So it wasn't a fly-by-night. The Klan got, according to the best estimates I've seen, 2 million members nationally. Some people say more than that. And that's a lot of people. That's a high percentage of the population.
Okay.
So the Oregonian did not distinguish itself in its coverage, and nor did the Oregon Journal. And they rationalized the Klan's activities in many cases. So by the time you get to the anti-Catholic ballot measure, the Oregonian basically did editorials saying, oh, well, this isn't a religious bigotry issue. It clearly was. They said it was, if you read the speeches of the Klan leaders, they were bigoted against Klans. The only good Catholic is a dead Catholic, one of the leaders said. So, but they rationalized and they justified it and said, oh no, these organizations like the Masonic groups that push the ballot measure, they're very good patriotic, their motives are noble. And the Oregonian said that in editorials, and so did the Oregon Journal. And the Oregon Telegram, I think, called it like it was, and they editorialized against it, and they provided more critical coverage. Now there were other media. Really, this was before television, and radio, before radio coverage. So we weren't talking about electronic media. We're talking about newspapers and magazines.
Right.
And the aside from the Telegram paper in Medford, there was some gutsy coverage there because that's where they had those necktie parties. There was a newspaper in Salem that was very gutsy. There was in Corvallis. And I think someone in Eastern Oregon. Those are the ones that, from what I read, were the ones who really stood up to the Klan and tried to cover them fairly.
What about C.C. Chapman doing that particular time?
C.C. Chapman was
Oregon Voters
Digest.
Oregon Voters Digest.
And,
folks.
and I read through a lot of there. They were, I think, a weekly, and they had really incisive coverage. He by the way, was considered a conservative,
Right.
but he gave pretty good coverage of the Klan. He's the one that wrote that story that I cited about how the head of the Klan was just holding court in the Pittock building, downtown Portland, and all people came up and kissed up and said, please endorse me. And that was his, and he interviewed the people, the leader of the Klan. So he was quite the influential journalist in the area.
Really?
Political journalism, yeah.
Cool.
And there's stuff in the labor press, I think, that was probably critical, and there was a Catholic media, there was Jewish media. Those were not widely circulated because you see the populations were pretty low.
Were there minority papers doing that? For the time?
Yeah, there was the Advocate.
The
I think
Advocate.
was it Beatrice Kennedy, if I'm not Morrow Kennedy. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, they were critical, and I think those are digitized. You can look through their articles at the time.
And those are the Historical Society? Or?
At the Multnomah County Library, and I think some of you can get online through the University of Oregon and other sources, historical Oregonians. So yeah, they had articles, but they didn't really have a wide readership.
Right.
Labor, Jewish, Catholic, Black, those publications tried, but I don't think they captured. They were that influential. The Klan started a boycott of the Portland Telegram because of their coverage, and they lost reportedly 5,000 circulation right away. They attacked the employees. They attacked the news racks. There was some violence involved, and such that the Portland Telegram lost its lease on a building. There's still a building called the Telegram Building where they were based.
Right.
We had a picture of it in the Portland Tribune.
Yeah.
But they had to move, and so what analysts have said is the Portland Telegram never recovered from taking on the Klan. They had a kind of a righteous coverage. Some might say they were, they adopted it as a cause and might not have been objective. But it's hard as a reporter to be that objective when you're talking about hatred, covering
Right.
hate.
we got about 8 more minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No problem. No
Okay.
problem. But at the same time, is it?
We got to talk about how the Klan fell apart. But you tell me how you want to use
No,
that.
let's go on and do it.
Okay. Okay. So the next part in the series is really how the Klan self-destructed,
Hold on, yes.
and there were splits in the National Klan. So people fighting for control of the National Klan, people in Oregon sided with the different factions. One guy led a breakaway group. He took several chapters. The Indiana, hugely influential Indiana organizer. He took his chapters out of the Klan. He was later convicted of manslaughter. So that kind of stuff was happening, destroying the Klan's image. And so you had people leaving the Klan and doing tell-alls. The editor of the Klan newspaper, there was a Klan newspaper based in Portland, a guy by the name of Len Deaver who was there. And one of the pieces I wrote about, probably don't have time, but the Klan got desperate and they started trying to find all these money-earning schemes, and some of them were outright fraud. They were going to build a 10-story headquarters in downtown Portland, and they collected money from Klansmen, and it never happened, and people said these leaders, remember it was a private corporation, were pocketing the money. So there's a rebellion of the other clans throughout Oregon against the Portland Klan, which was all-powerful. So those kind of splits. What I think is kind of comical is they started an organization for non-citizen or immigrants. How can an anti-immigrant organization have a Klan auxiliary made up of immigrants? Well, they're mostly Canada. They weren't coming from Africa or Latin America, but they weren't coming from Southern Europe or Eastern Europe. But it was a way to get money. So they got to wear robes, red robes, not white robes, but they had to pay dues. So these guys were making money, and there's fights over who's going to collect the dues, the Georgia headquarters or the people in Portland. They started a women's auxiliary that got as many as 500 people at meetings in Portland. So it was really big. But I think we should save the last few minutes just for lessons, because maybe what lessons you see. But what I thought was fascinating was how many parallels down to the language to today. The term America First was used then. The Klan blamed an election when they lost that primary for governor. They called it a stolen election. They said that it was the Pope's fault in Rome. They actually had a statement about the Pope. So stolen election. They bashed immigrants. They bashed the media. They really did the big lie. There was one thing that the Klan put out about how Jews were kidnapping children and selling them into sexual slavery. Doesn't that sound a little bit like the QAnon? So a lot of this is very so. The replacement theory. That's not new.
No, it's not.
The Klan was talking about, whites are going to be outnumbered by, at that time it was Asians. They were worried about Chinese and Japanese because they were more numerical than blacks and others here. So they were starting to talk about the replacement. Oh, we gotta keep them out, or whites going to lose their majority. So there's so many parallels
Big time.
to today. That's how I concluded how you want to use those lessons. That's up to others. So.
Wow. Well, this has been good. This has been interesting. I guess we were just getting ready to get into that other piece, and that, again, maybe I can invite you back over,
Yeah.
and we can talk about where are we going from here. I mean, where do we still have the Klan here in Oregon?
Well, I think Daryl Milner,
Daryl?
prominent Black Black Studies professor, would say, Klan mentality never died. It just morphs. And I think that's right. Whether you call it the KKK, the Klan faded in 1925-ish in Oregon. By that period, it kind of, became in the dustbin. But then when it came back, I don't know, what was that, the 1960s, 70s, when you started to hear about Klan, it never got as popular. It's still not as popular, but we know all about David Duke, right? The grand,
Exactly. Yes. That's huge.
and they have people here, but the question is, you don't have the white sheets, but you may have people with the same mentality.
They got suits on now, right?
Yeah.
Well, hey, this has been great. In fact, I will be in touch with Daryl.
Oh, yeah.
See if I can get him, if you will,
Sure.
to do his piece. It'd be interesting in terms of when he started Portland State professor,
Yeah.
and the like. And I noticed you also quoted him
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
pieces. I thought that was really good. But it would be nice to be able to have him talk to that piece and that time,
Yes.
and where it's at today, because he's still there.
He's still there. He's studying this stuff. I talked to him after the series came out, and he gave me his feedback. So
Yes,
it was
yes.
good.
And I've seen him on the Google and this that, and the other. Where is he today? You got me? And then hopefully if we can get that piece together, get him to do a 30 piece, and if not that, if you don't mind, you see if we can get in there with you. You guys, both of them, we can just talk about where do we go from here.
Sure.
Because you pretty well shared a great deal of the coverage, basically on some of the things that he was basically he responds similar to that piece. But now, where are we now? People talking about reparations now. They're taking terms now like reparation aspect of it.
Well, I would just go back to what Brian Stevenson would say. You can't bridge some of those gaps we have now, especially in race, without fessing up to your history.
Exactly. That's the key. That's the key, and then that's really what we'd like to focus on. Where do we go from here? We got to go to another level. It's not doing it. It's not doing the country. In fact, it's not doing folks here in Portland and Oregon.
And in some states, it's probably illegal now to do this kind of stuff in the classroom.
Exactly. Especially Texas. You can't do this stuff.
Where all our textbooks come from,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a possibility we might be able to start here in Oregon, in Portland. In Oregon.
Yeah.
I think, there's progression here in many ways. But the key is that to share that history. You gotta get through the history aspect.
Can I just add one more thing? If anybody wants to see these articles, they're no longer on the news rack because those are gone. But you can go to you can Google Portland Tribune and KKK
Portland Tribune.
and KKK, and you can find them online.
These articles.
Yes, and you can also go to the Oregon Remembrance Project.
Okay.
My buddy Taylor Stewart runs that, and he has archived the entire series there.
Okay.
And then the Oregon Mental Health Archive, Jason Renault has archived it there.
Okay.
So if you look up Oregon Remembrance Project, and there's a little thing on the right, look up KKK and the Oregon Mental Health Archive.
Okay.
And so those are three places if you're interested in seeing the whole series.
Okay. Do you have a website or anything like that?
No.
Okay, good. We'll just keep it.
Okay.
This is the website.
Yeah, I'm retired.
Okay. Not yet, Steve. There's some other things we want to do. Well, folks, you've got the holistic approach here in terms of where we're going to be going. It's not forgotten. The whole idea is that we want to make sure we get the fact that we got to talk about this history. We've got to talk about this history. If in fact we're going to go to the next tier, we've got to do that. So I'm going to, like I said before, we're going to hopefully get Dr. Miller, have him come on the show and talk a little bit about his involvement. He's still here. He's still studying and this, that, and the other. But he can talk about this and take it at that particular piece, and then have Steve here, and then to kind of have a little discussion, and then at that point we can then ask him questions. Right, Steve?
Yeah.
Right? Fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But the whole purpose is that let's see what we can do about the futures here. Like I said, I'm at that point in my life. I got a good 10, 15 years, maybe 30. but I really look back. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but I'm not going to go on and on and on. What I want to do is just look. Let's see. That's how I can enjoy myself. Because Steve and I would like to do a little fishing. Right? See, he's at that age factor. He can still bait my hook. See, so that's kind of like where we're coming from. But anyway, it's a very serious issue right now. But right in front with you, let's keep an open mind. Let's get something done. Okay? As George Payne used to say, back to what you believe in. Remember that one?
Right. Yep.
Good. Folks, take care. Have a good evening, and enjoy yourself. And wear your mask now. We got another epidemic in town. Take care.
So I'm sorry I wasn't looking at the time, but I think it was okay.
We did good.
Okay. Would have been nice to have a little more on the conclusions, but I wanted.
But see, we can add on to this.
Yeah,
next piece.
yeah.